This is Susan Popoola, host of the Leading in Mosaic World podcast, with a special series on being a man in today's world. As of late, I found myself increasingly conversing with men and focusing my work on boys and men. Boys and young men trying to find their place in the world, emerging leaders in the workspace, established leaders navigating increasingly complex environments, and successful men missing a sense of real fulfillment. It all points to the question of what it means to be a man in today's world. A question fundamental to men, for gender harmony, and for a mosaic world in which everyone is valued for who they are and what they have to offer to the world around them. Join me as I explore this subject with a rich diversity of men, and women too. Thank you.
This is a special series of the Leading in Mosaic World podcast focused on being a man in today's world. My guest today is Gamal Turawa, a cultural change specialist, international speaker, and the founder of Purple Frog Connections. He's also a former Metropolitan Police Officer and the first openly gay Black police officer in the Met. His extraordinary personal journey has taken him from adversity and homelessness to being, or should I say, to becoming the protagonist of the BAFTA-winning film, The Black Cop. Today, Gamal works with organizations around the world, helping leaders and teams create cultures where people feel seen, heard, and valued. Through his unique geology approach, he invites people beyond labels, assumptions, and divisions, encouraging courageous conversations that reconnect us with our shared humanity. Very mosaic, should I say. Known for his warmth, honesty, and thought-provoking storytelling, Gamal doesn't just change minds, he changes the way people see themselves and each other. Gamal, or should I say G? Thank you very much for being my guest today.
You're welcome.
Starting a bit differently from the norm, we happened to meet just over a year or two back. And we have had some interesting conversations. We've journeyed together down the Costco aisles and discovered things that we have in common. Amongst other things. And on that ooh note, let's get into some really big oohs. So let's start off with, where were you born and raised? And there's possibly, it might not be the same thing, but where were you born and raised?
Yeah, well, I was born in London in the early 60s. I was raised in several different places with several different families. So my first family that I was aware of, I had my birth family. And then when I was about 3 months old, I was fostered by a white foster family in a village in Kent. So I grew up in this village as the only Black kid in the village. Then when I was 8, I was taken back to London by my natural born father. So I was taken from an all-white environment to an all-Black environment. Then I was sent from there when I was 16 to Nigeria, where I spent 8 years in Nigeria and came back here when I was 24.
So a very varied journey, and you can state that in very simplistic terms, as I often do, because there's some parallels with me in terms of being private fostered, as they call it. There are other words, but I like private fostered. Private fostered, living in an all-white family. I was with my 2 sisters, and then going back to your birth family.
Is that your 2 natural born sisters, or?
My 2 natural born sisters. So my 2, this isn't about me, but there are 8 of us. There are 8 of us, and without getting into too much detail, the youngest 3 of us, me being the youngest, another one of my sisters did live with them, but when I was born, she went back to my birth parents. And so the first 3 of us were with Mum and Eileen, her daughter, and that was like the first 8 years of my life. And then we went to our birth parents, but the difference is we're taken straight to Nigeria. So I can identify with some of what you say, but every experience is different. Even the difference between my experience and the way I see and process things will be different from the way in which my sisters did.
Yeah.
And also, very pertinent today, you're a man, I'm a woman, and that comes with differences in its own right. So just thinking of those different stages of you being a boy and a young man, what was life like for you as a boy, as a male, navigating the world?
I think I didn't have time to think about who I was because I was always in a state of survival, not knowing where I'd be next or what was going on. So I didn't have that time. I didn't have roots. I didn't have that space to say, who am I? So I was constantly reacting to the environment in a state of survival as opposed to understanding the environment, if that makes sense.
It does make sense to me to some extent, most especially as I've heard some of the other talks that I've heard some of your interviews, but it possibly some context to that. What was it like as opposed to the thing about who you were and your knowledge of who you were? What was life like for you, first and foremost, with your white family?
My white family were very, very loving. They were lovely, 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 lovely people. There were jokes, obviously, because I was the only black kid there. But, in the house, it was fun. It was when I went out of the house that you heard some of the malicious stuff occasionally. But my foster brother was my brother. My foster mother was, I always said I learned to hug from my foster mother. I learned what hugging meant. And that's something that stayed with me. Yeah, there were amazing people. I still miss them dearly. God rest their soul. They're both dead now, both my foster parents. It was this little village in Kent. It was very free. I would wander the whole day. I remember sort of getting up in the morning. I don't know if you remember the treetop orange.
Yes, I do.
I get a treetop orange bottle, fill it with orange juice and water, and that's it. I would leave the house and I'd be gone, walking through the forest, the apple. If I was hungry, you just pick it off the trees in the orchards. And it was a very sort of idyllic, beautiful lifestyle. And then when I was 8, came home from school and there was a huge black man in the living room. And it was the first time I had physically seen a black person. And he terrified me. And my foster mother said, "This is your father. Yeah, you're going to go to London with him for a couple of weeks." And London was like Budapest or something like that. It was strange. And we went up to London and my father had no intention of taking me back to my foster parents. He had lied to my foster parents. I was a kid. I wasn't told anything. And I remember getting to London and turning up at this house in London and this woman opening the door and said, "There's Mummy's little boy," and hugging me. And I'm like, "I don't know who you are." Taken into this house. And what was interesting is overnight, my name was changed. My foster parents called me Vic. So I grew up being Vic. And then when I got to my parents' house, it was Gamal. And they would call Gamal. I wasn't used to hearing it. I didn't answer. So that made them label me as stubborn, rude, disrespectful, which is a label that once it's stuck, and nothing I could do could change it. And then you get caught in this, what I call the cross-cultural communication loop. And for example, I was brought up by my foster parents. Look at me when I'm talking to you. I get to my dad's house, my natural father's house, and he'd call me and I'd say, "Yes, Daddy." And suddenly I'd get a slap for being rude or disrespectful. And I'm like, I just said yes. I don't know what I've done to deserve this slap. But in my dad's culture, for a child to look a man in the eye or look their adult in the eye was disrespectful. I didn't know this. I wasn't brought up with this. It wasn't part of my conditioning. When I started school, I went to a school where I was the only black kid in the school in Kent. And suddenly I'm in this school and I'm in a sea of blackness. And I'm thinking, I don't know anything. I don't fit in. Everything like that. I became disruptive in school. And when I look back on it, it was probably childhood trauma. You're in an environment, you're a kid, you don't know how to process. You process with your emotions and your frustration. You act up and they act out. And then you go to school, the teachers will talk to you. And that's it. From my dad, I learned to look down. Now I go to school, the teachers write on my report, does not pay attention, doesn't listen. My dad would read that report and that would reinforce his view of me. So all the time I'm caught in this cross-cultural loop of things, not knowing what's going on. Food's changed overnight. I went from roast potatoes and Sunday roast to Eba and then, pounded yam or stuff like that. And it was like Everything was different. And my father's house was like, for me, it was like a prison. It wasn't a place I felt happy in. I ran away from home quite a few times. My father was taken to court a few times for battering me. Yeah, that's pretty much my childhood.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Hey, it's made me who I am today. And I don't
Yes,
mean that in a flippant way.
I
Yeah.
understand. It's still tough,
Mm.
and it's not what any child should ever have to have faced or should face today. But one of the things that struck me as you were talking was having to navigate different environments.
Mhm.
Specifically, when you mentioned that you learnt to look down because that's what your father expected of you culturally, but in doing that, that got you into trouble in
Mm.
school. And I think of young people today, specifically Black children,
Mm.
and I will say specifically boys, and those whose parents have come from different countries and to the UK where there are different cultural norms.
Mm.
And I just wonder, you may not know, but just reflecting, I wonder how many of them may possibly be faced with the same challenges that you were faced with.
I mean, you know that because I've done work with teachers and spoken about that eye contact thing. And there's teachers like, I didn't know that. And I say it's very easy to read cues from people from our own cultural perspective and totally get it wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's things like, I mean, other things like body distance, how personal space. Right? In some cultures, that personal space is 2 or 3 feet. Right? If you've been to Lagos, that personal space is virtually non-existent. You know, you go to some Arab countries. I mean, I remember doing some work with some Arab countries, and you know, there's a thing where these European businessmen went to, I think it was Saudi Arabia. I can't remember. But there's a video on it somewhere. The Saudis keep a distance from people until they get close to you, and then they move closer. Right. So these people with the oil companies wanted to get oil business from the Saudis, and the Saudis went, and initially the distance was like that. But as the Saudis got more comfortable, they started to move closer to these Europeans. These Europeans now weren't used to that same distance. So they started to move back. And what you had is the Saudis thinking, you don't want to do business with us.
Yeah.
And all these things, I love these things, how we read these cues from our own cultural perspective.
And experiences.
And experiences, and miss
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And I just think with that, what do you say to parents of boys, specifically Black boys, those that have come to this country with the expectations and the norms that they have, and they're trying to bring up boys to the best of their ability, especially if they're in inner cities where they hear all the negative statistics about crime and things like that.
What do I say? It's not an easy world to navigate. In fact, you know, it's very, very challenging. Because I mean, I've done work with some Black churches and talking to parents, and you know, they want to hold on to their values.
Exactly, and understandably.
You know, that's who they are.
Yeah.
But their children are now in this environment, where they say things like, "You touch me, I'll call the police." Where they've come from the environment like, "Call the police for what? Police aren't coming, they'll probably come around and help beat you." So there's this cross-cultural confusion going on all the time.
Yeah. So when you are in those spaces,
Yeah.
is there a fundamental message or one key thing that you say to those parents to help them navigate those differences and those challenges?
There are some parents that I've spoken to who said, I'm going to send them back to Nigeria or Ghana. And I'm sort of like, oh, what's the phrase? I'm going to send them back home. And I said, wait, hold on a minute. If your kids were born here, you're not sending them home. That's not home for them. So you're not sending them back home. You're sending them to an entirely different environment. And that can either make or break the child. You know, there are some people I've met who will say, yeah, sending me to Nigeria was the best thing that happened to me. And there are others who became drug addicts or rebellious or really, in fact, they got too much from Nigeria that Nigeria sent them back to the UK. And then they came back here to a world, they can't process this cross-cultural stuff. So it's very hard to say there is one answer for everything.
If you send a child to a different country, that's a different environment for them. It's not home to them, and it could have negative repercussions. So the question then for that parent who is probably struggling,
Yeah.
is what can they then do? We know your experience, at least at a super surface level of what it was like, what the challenges were like for you. I wonder from your observations, coming back to England as a young adult, young man, ultimately joining the police, working with the police and moving on from there. What you're doing now, working as a cultural change specialist. How have you observed the differences for boys and young men? Is it the way it always has been, or what do you observe in how the environments and how they have to navigate the world around them?
I try not to say this is the story of the world you're living in. I try and say, okay, what world, or who do you want to be? Let's start from who do you want to be? And it's also, I think we live in a world now where we're very quick to label. And what happens is you end up with young black boys who are being labeled by their teachers, being labeled by the government, being labeled by, and certainly said by the police, the authorities, the establishment. And what they end up doing is getting into a place where they're constantly fighting labels.
What are the labels that we give to the people?
The labels are, they're stubborn, they need to be controlled, disruptive, disrespectful. They're treated in some cases as if they're a problem rather than human beings. And the thing is, the young people themselves are not always conscious of what's going on. They know that they feel something and they know that they need to resist it, but they don't know what they're resisting, and they can become self-destructive. And that's the sad part about it with me, because I know that path. I look at myself as one of the lucky ones, but I know even within my own family, I know people that have gone down that path, and I can see how it's messed them up.
Because you mentioned when you were young, I guess you weren't supported. You weren't understood. You were navigating cultural changes. You were basically traumatized by it all and became disruptive.
Carried a lot of anger, carried a lot of fear. Like I said, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't being myself. I was surviving. I was learning how to duck and weave and bob, and how, all this stuff that's coming at me. It was like, I'm juggling it. Nobody had taught me how to manage it. Nobody had taught me that I don't have to buy into it. And I'm just fortunate I didn't go down the road of drugs or alcohol.
What shifted things for you that enabled you to get where you are today?
It was a process. I think when I came back from Nigeria, I came back with a lot of anger and a lot of hatred.
For who? Towards who?
Towards my parents, towards being black. I came back to a country that I thought was mine, realized that I'd left it as a kid, came back as an adult. And I remember one of the first things I wanted to do was open up a bank account. And I walked in and said, I would like to open up an account. And the clerk behind the counter said, we don't do accounts for Nigerians. And I'm sort of, no, I'm British. I've got my passport. I'm British. I was born here. No, we're not opening an account for you. And it was that slap in the face of, you don't belong here. When I first came back, that's even till today, it's still stuck with me. But it was that feeling of, you don't belong. And part of me joining the police was I wanted to have some way to say, look, I'm a member of this society. And that badge, in my view, gave me that validation. And it made me realize, well, and I didn't want to be me. I didn't know who I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just didn't want to be this person that I'd been taught to be. And then that all starts to come to a point where a crescendo of all these emotions just start coming together. And in 2002, I found myself wanting to commit suicide. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't, in case you're wondering.
Thankfully.
Yeah. But that was the beginning of the change. I had a breakdown, which I was off work for almost 3 months. And that was the point where I started to ask myself, what has got me to this point? And I didn't like that I was in that place. And I had a counselor who asked me 2 questions, which totally changed everything for me. And one of the questions was, who defines you? And I realized in working through that question, my whole life up to that point was trying to be what I thought other people wanted me to be, or even fighting off what I thought other people wanted me to be. None of that in that space was me saying to me, who are you? I never knew that I could do that. The second question he asked me was, why did you allow people to intimidate you? I hated that question because it made me look in the mirror. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a victim. And when you look in the mirror and you see a victim, it's like, I don't want to be that person. But you have to, in my view, for me, I can't speak for other people, you have to work through the ugliness of where you are to find the beauty. And you can't find the beauty until you accept that there's some ugliness there. And I think it was that was learning to accept that ugliness that made things a little bit more, okay, this is where I need to go. And I called it, I had to go through a process of unlearning.
Yeah.
Unlearning who I'd been taught to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much in that, what you've just said.
Mm.
And if there's a young person, a young boy, could be anyone, but a young boy and their parent listening, I think the most fundamental thing is, who are you? Who defines you?
Yeah.
You might have people that influence you, because I always say to parents, the most important thing you can give your child is not material things, it's that self-worth, that self-value, that
Yes.
sense of
Give
purpose.
them space to find who they are.
And that's who defines you. I think parents, role models, because we talk about the lack of role models for boys, young men. So parents, role models, teachers, whoever else can be positive influences, but they're not the ones that define us. It's how we define ourselves. And I guess that's probably almost that pillar that was a turning point for you.
But it's not about how you define it. It's about knowing that you can.
So, and I guess when you spoke about young Black boys and young men, you mentioned earlier the labels that are often put on them. And I think that's boys generally. I hear a lot of negativity about boys and young men and men generally. It's one of the reasons why I started asking the question, what does it mean to be a man in today's world? Because a lot of what I heard was the negativity, and then I heard about the pressures and the challenges. So hence the question, what does it actually mean? Let's explore it as we're doing today. And in many ways, what you ended up doing when you reached that crisis point. But there are those fundamental questions of who defines you and not letting other people intimidate you or define who you are.
I mean,
Who are you?
they are very powerful questions.
Yeah.
So who am I?
Or to use the same language, how do you define yourself now? I know I've read out an introduction, but in simple terms, how do you define yourself?
A traveler.
A traveler.
A traveler open to new experiences. One of the things I've embraced, when I first heard that question, who are you? And I worked through it, I had this fear. I was almost 40. And I had this fear, oh my God, I don't know who I am. Everything I had been was what everybody else had told me I was. The only person who hadn't told me who I was me. And now that I have the opportunity to tell myself who I am, I don't know what to tell myself. So I had to go through this process of, okay, what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be gay? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a human being? And when I say, what does it mean? I had to figure out what it meant to me.
And I was about to then,
other people.
Yeah, because then I was then about to ask, what does it mean to you to be? I mean, I could put them all together in one, but I'm not going to do so. I'm going to say, what does it mean to you to be Black, to be gay, to be a man? Especially as someone who said that he didn't like or hated being Black before. So
there was this Bell Hooks. I don't know if you've heard of.
I've heard Bell Hooks, American.
Yeah. There's a question she poses which impacted me a great deal. And it says, do you see your Blackness as a joy or a burden? Because either way you look at it will determine the life that you live. And I realized I'd seen my Blackness as a burden. And now it's a joy. I can look at myself in the mirror and not think, oh my God, I'm Black, but think, boy, you're a good guy. You've done well. My sexual orientation, it took me almost 2 years for me to tell me I was gay. I had to work hard on that because there was so much, I'd been brought up with so much negativity around that. So that was a hard thing. So now it's like, I say to people, maybe, oh, you can't be gay. I said, the mistake you make is that you think I need your approval to be me. I don't. Yeah. Why am I going to be down on things about myself that are naturally part of me?
Yet it took you
A long time.
so long to reconcile yourself to it. So how did you come to the realization that you're gay? What was the challenge of accepting it? And how did you come to that acceptance?
I don't like the term realization that I was gay.
Okay.
It's almost as if it's the acceptance that I was gay. That's the word I would use. For a long time, I thought it was something I was going to grow out of. It's a phase I'm going through.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah. And I saw it as a burden because every message I had growing up in the 60s and 70s was being gay was wrong. It was evil. It was disgusting. It was something to be made fun of. And that's how I saw myself, that part of myself. To get to that point of sort of like I said, it took me 2 years to get rid of that self-hatred around that. It wasn't a one moment thing. It was a gradual thing of a lot of hard work, a lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of French, late night arguments with myself, right? It took a lot of work. And to say, right, I've got to stop those negative voices. I've got to learn to tell them how to shut up.
Yeah. With that, what do you say to the young man? Specifically the young black man, because there's a different level of burden, I believe, who has been told till today that it's wrong. What do you say to him?
Be patient with yourself. And I think that one of the beauties of the work I do in the place I am is I can tell them that there's hope on the other side. I can tell them I know what you're going through, and I know there is another side. You may not see it now, but it is there. And it's like, I remember very early when I came out, I did an interview on the BBC Radio. And I think it was a week or so after that interview, I went to an event in London for black gay men. I heard of it somewhere and I thought, oh, I'm going to go to that. And I'm in this room and there's a young black gay guy sitting next to me. And we got talking and I just said to him, so why are you here? What brought you here? How did you hear about this? And he goes, I was listening to the radio and I heard this black gay guy on the radio. And he said, and it made me think. And he said, and then I heard about this for a friend. And I said, no, I'm coming out. I said, this is the first time I've been in a black gay space. And I just smiled. Then after the event, I said, oh, you going to the station? He said, yes. We started walking. And then halfway through the walk, I said to him, you know that interview you heard? He goes, yeah. I said, that was me. Yeah. And the scream he let out, it was in Notting Hill, I'll never forget it, in the high street there. He just screamed, hugged me, and the tears just came out of him. And I think and that's just one example of so many I can give you of those moments.
Yeah.
We become the example of that it can be done.
You mentioned that you know what such young men are going through. And I'd say typically, I mean, it's always a generalization. I can't say that I understand. Help me understand what he would have been going through before you got to that space.
Fear, anger, confusion, not being heard, not being listened to, not having someone to listen to them. And not only that, I think it's also, I'm in the process of writing my biography. And one of the things I've uncovered about myself is that there were people along the way who were prepared to help me. But because of the negativity I was carrying, I couldn't hear them.
Yeah.
So I say when I speak to young people now, I'm not here to change you. I'm here to plant some seeds.
Yep. That makes perfect sense, yeah.
And hopefully, when the time is right, those seeds will germinate.
Yeah. One more question in this area. I think it's just one more. But what about the parent that believes, I love my child, but this is wrong?
I know. God, I know. God, I know. I remember I was probably about 13 and we were sitting down watching TV at home and the lights were off. And then my mum was lying on the sofa behind me. I'm sitting on the floor. My sister's sitting one of my sisters sitting on the other side of the room. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember this guy, but a guy called Larry Grayson.
I don't. I heard you speaking about it before, but yes.
Larry Grayson was a very camp TV presenter, comedian, right?
Okay.
And he was on this TV show called, I've forgotten the name of the program now. Anyway, it's a TV show on Saturday night. Yeah, come to me. And for some reason, I don't know where this question came from. My sister said, Mummy, what would you do if you thought Gamal was a homosexual? And I was so glad that the lights were off because I could feel the color drain from my face. And then my mum said, I would shove a red hot poker right up his ass. And I was thinking, when you're around your parents who are supposed to love you, and you suddenly, I can't even be myself around my parents. I can't be myself in this house.
Yeah.
It's hard. I years later, I wrote a letter to my mom, and it went something like this, very briefly. He said, I had a dream that you had died and gone to heaven, and you got to the gates of heaven, and the keeper of the gate looked at your name and said, yes, Mrs. Turawa. Right. Sorry, you're in the wrong place. You're going to hell. And she said, why am I going to hell? You failed the test that we gave you. What test? We gave you a gay son. And she goes, yes. And I told him it was wrong. And I told him he was going to go to hell. And I told him all the bad things about it. He goes, that's the problem. We gave you a gay son to test your capacity to love. You were his mother. You were supposed to love him unconditionally. And you judged him. You failed the test. So you're
But
going
she
to
felt
hell.
it was wrong. But she felt it was wrong.
She felt it was wrong.
Yeah.
Even
So
till today.
So I guess there's something about, even if you do, and we hope people have a greater awareness and understanding, but even if you do, there's still a compassion and a love and taking time to understand.
Yeah. But there's still a lot of parents, especially from religious backgrounds, very religious, the almost fanatically religious backgrounds, who I've had people from churches come up to me and say, I know a place where they can change you. And I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with me. That's the devil speaking. And he sort of looked at, I'm an adult. I can challenge that. But if you're growing up in a house with a kid and you're hearing that rhetoric and you know that's you, one, it makes you vulnerable because you'll go to somewhere where you can find that love. And that might not always be a nice place.
Yeah. And if I pivot a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
In some ways, my understanding is that is one of the things that leads young boys and girls, typically young boys, into gangs because they are not getting support. I'm saying it's the only reason, but they're not getting support. They don't feel understood and they don't feel accepted in other environments, and they find it in groupings of people who might be doing things that are wrong, or ultimately are if they're gangs in the true sense of the word.
If love, parental love has many guises. Right? And even with my mum and how homophobic my mum is, right, I still think that she was coming from a place of love. If that love doesn't resonate with my interpretation of what love is, there's a disconnect. And people who, run gangs, they're looking for that disconnect. There's the same we used to have in the police, is that if you don't raise your child right, the streets will raise them for you. Yeah. And it's not just about looking out for young people. We need to look out for parents and help parents as well.
I was about to say so because I was thinking back to the early part of our conversation when I asked about parents and the message to parents, because there's something about accepting a child. I think key part that we might not talk about enough is understanding, having the dialogue to understand. But then there is also something about boundaries, whether they're based on cultural norms from the UK or different place. There is something about boundaries, and how do we enforce those boundaries so that a young person doesn't push back completely and end up in a different space.
And I like that. I like what you said there. It is about boundaries, but it's how those boundaries are either enforced or maintained. Boundaries can be hugs, or boundaries can be a whip. It's about having that awareness. And it's very difficult to go into someone's house and tell them how to raise their kids. I even as a police officer, there were so many houses I went into and I'm sitting there and thinking, I know exactly why your kid's behaving like that. I can see it.
Yeah, but saying that, putting your police hat back on for a minute or two.
Been a long time. I just need to dust it off.
Okay. Yes, I'll give you a second or two to do so. But then, if you think of the stories we hear about young boys
Mm.
and knife crime
Mm.
and the pressures and the challenges and misogyny and Andrew Tate,
Social
all
media.
messages, what do you say if you were still in the Met today? What would you be saying to that parent when you go into their house? You can't tell them what to do, but what would you be saying? Because I'm sure they'll be looking at you thinking, what do I do?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. If I had the answer to that, I'd be a multimillionaire.
Okay.
Right? If there was one simple answer you could give for that, it's not easy. This is a completely different world to the world I grew up in, right? A kid can go into their bedroom under their duvet and they have access to everything in the world in their hand.
Well,
And
that's a phone that you're holding.
yeah, that's what I mean. Through this device, you can find their what's the word? Their circle,
Yep.
right? Which their parents may not even know about and not even aware that this is going on. They can be groomed through this. It's a very, very different world to the world I grew up in. I mean, the only thing I can say to parents is that you need to make yourself aware of how the world works. I mean, there's even parents who I've met who have no idea how this works.
So there's a total disconnect. So I guess
Yeah.
if we think of how things have evolved over time, I mean, there's so many different things we could talk about, like what the different varieties, like there might have just been Kellogg's cornflakes, and now you have all the varieties and all the flavors and everything and the matchas and everything else that has changed. But I guess one of the most fundamental changes is communication devices
Access to
to
information.
the world,
Yeah.
access to different worlds, because I think it's a great thing that I can go online, I can speak to someone in China, I could work with someone in Afghanistan, I could be communicating with my family all over the world. So there's a positive, but there are also, I can have a better understanding of different places that I would never have understood if not for technology, if not for the smartphone, which gives me even more ready access. There are those positives, but there are also the challenges that come with it. And I
Yeah.
guess as adults, we need to understand what young people are accessing. Because I don't know. I know there's the government idea. Well, I think they're talking about banning young people in the UK from having access to social media.
Right? I don't know if you saw it on, they were talking to some young people on the BBC, right? They were talking to some young people in Australia, because Australia was the first country to bring it in. And the kids in Australia were telling you how they get around it.
Yeah, because they're like VPN and other things.
Yeah.
And I mean, personally, I'm not big on banning things. I don't have a 16-year-old at the moment. So you could say it's easy for me to say, because I find it interesting. We give phones to babies. And
Sometimes you
they're
think they're
playing
born
with
with
it.
that.
Yeah, like toddlers. And so are we going to stop doing that? And at what stage are we going to stop giving devices to them if then we say it's banned? And then they get to an older age of age 16, 18, and we expect them to pick them up again and start interacting with social media. I don't know whether we've thought that bit through.
I think it's too late anyway. The genie's already out the bottle.
So we need to understand the world that they are accessing.
Yeah.
And I would say not just understand it, but have conversations with them about it.
I mean, nowadays, fortunately, there are places where parents can go online to find out how to have those conversations. Yeah. There are websites and groups and support groups that help people to understand, help parents to navigate some of that stuff. And I think it's about empowering parents to find that information out.
Yeah.
And not be
And
complacent about it.
yeah, we've just finished a small piece of research. I call it a preliminary piece, which is talking to boys. There's an online survey about their world, what's life like for them. So there are the assumptions, the views we have, but what do they actually say? And so the plan is to create reports from that, to use that as a conversation point with parents as well as young people, because I think conversation is so fundamental in these things.
Question for you, if I may, right? When you have that, how do you find the boys that you're talking to? Because there's the ones that will talk to you
Yeah.
and the ones that will not come anywhere near you. And sometimes the ones that we need to talk to are the ones that won't engage.
I say we start somewhere.
Mm.
So with this particular piece, we've started with those through colleges, schools, through groups, through parents. So that's I call it preliminary. It's a starting point. Going forward from there, there's the question. You say they don't talk. They might not come forward, but I believe in going to them. So I will see a young person. I remember a number of years back when there were riots, I went to visit a couple of friends in London, and we got in a lift to go upstairs. This was central London. We got in a lift, and this young boy got into the lift, and the older man that lived there, he didn't even acknowledge him. And I challenged him on that later, and I was like, right, I mean, how do we engage with young people if we don't even acknowledge their perspective? And the initial response is, oh, that's a young person and they're supposed to greet us and everything else. It's like, well, okay, they didn't. That's not his point of knowledge. So why doesn't it start? Because if you start by just saying hello, or even if it's a nod of the head to the young boy across the road, and we start building up from there, then if we see something that is wrong, it's easier to engage with the person. Yeah. To ask the questions, the casual question, and develop relationships from there.
I have two sides to that coin for me. I see the point of that, but I also see there's a side of it where people say, no, it's not my responsibility.
And I would say, I talk about a mosaic world.
Yeah.
I talk about going back to early life. One of the things that my mum always told me, that's my foster mum, was that everyone is of value. Everyone is important. It doesn't matter whether it's the person managing the office or the person cleaning the office. All my work ultimately links to helping to realize human value, the value that each person has for the benefit of themselves as an individual and the people around you. We are all inadvertently connected. That young person that is there on the street side that you say you're not responsible for, you don't know what's going on in his life or what's happening. He might be doing something wrong on the streets, or he might not, but you don't know what's going on. If you ignore him and say, I have no responsibility, and I'm not saying that we're therefore like responsible, have to go out and do things for everyone, but if we ignore and say, I have no responsibility, that might be the young man that your son brings home as a friend, that your daughter brings home as a partner, the person that stabs someone on the street that you know, and that person that is supported and guided and told that they're valuable might be the person that goes on to invent something that ultimately saves lives.
To the fire, yeah. I get that. I understand that, right? But I know that's not the kind of world we live in. Yeah.
Well, it's
as much as we want the world to be like that.
So how do we start? How do we move towards it?
That's the challenge. That's the work.
And that's where it starts, one conversation, one person at a time. We start somewhere.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't start and we shouldn't do. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the world isn't all rainbows and sunny clouds. And the thing is, the point I was making is we want that, right? I will speak to young people all the time, right? Yeah, wherever they are, whether it's in the gym, in the park, or whatever, I'll stop and I'll nod and I'll chat because I know the importance of that. But equally, I know people who wouldn't even give that the time of day. If there are people that want to do, we should empower the people that want to do that. I mean, there's two guys I know who are doing amazing work in this space. I worked in Trident when I was in the police. And one of the things that I remember as well is now, hopefully, I hope it's changed now. We used to work with external groups who are doing community work, and they used to have what I call it the me-we conversation. Right? And they'll come into a meeting and say, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do the other. Right? And you say, great. And then they would go, and if you give me the money, I will do this. Where's the we gone? I know people who are doing, for example, when we had knife crime, I had this idea that I wanted to bring all the parents who have lost one of their children or whatever to knife crime, bring them all together and say, let's tell our stories collectively. Let's make this impactful. The amount of them say, no, I'm sorry, I'm doing my own thing over here.
Yeah.
And building that unity can be a challenge.
And that's perfectly understandable and perfectly fine. There's the Margaret Mead, I think it's Margaret Mead, there's the saying that don't underestimate the change that a small group of committed people can make, because the reality is that's where real change really comes from. I could say a key part of this conversation reason, but the most fundamental reason for having these conversations is not just because I love talking to interesting people, but it's also to gain insights for myself, for people to listen and to gain insights. I know that even the conversations I generally have on a day-to-day basis, there's so many times that I have the conversation with a person who says, I hadn't thought about that. I am going to go away and do A, B, and C. I am going to, when I wrote my first book, someone contacted me and told me that he'd started running drumming lessons for young people in economically deprived areas. The men that I met, that I spoke to in the lift, when I challenged them to say, well, you didn't speak to him, and we went from he didn't say anything, it was, okay, I am going to start doing things differently, and they will start talking to young people.
Can I ask you a question? What do you hear me saying?
What do I hear you saying I don't think you're saying that much different from what I'm saying. I think there's a reality. I might come across as idealistic. I mean, I'm talking about a mosaic world, but there is the reality that not everyone will come on board with what we're saying. I think that's clear. But at the same time, there are those that will, and little drops of water, mighty ocean. Yes. And is there anything you'd like to add?
I think for me, one of the things that I think I would like to give people, or give anyone in the world, is hope that things can change. By living the example I live. I mean, when my film came out, one of the beauties of that film was I had emails from all over the world. And what I liked about the emails, they came from so many different communities. One I got from an email from a 55-year-old guy in Australia who lives in the outback in Australia. He said, I've never met a black person as far as I'm aware. I've grown up in this area. I've watched your film. He said, and what it's given me is I need to examine my life.
And the film is The Black Cop.
The Black Cop, yeah.
How can people gain access to watch? It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
So to some extent, you've already said enough to make people think, I want to watch that and find out what it is all about. But would you say the message is hope, or what is it? What's the most fun?
It's one of the things I believe in passionately, without any doubt, is that the fact that people can change. I have no doubt about that, because it's happened in my life. And going back to the point you made about, you can be the change the world needs. Be the change you wish to see in the world. I know that for a fact. So for me, it's about no matter what you go through, know that you can change.
Not only can you change, but you can become
bigger than
joyous. You can become a joyous person, as you've become, who meets a young lady and walks around the supermarket with her, seeing things, taking great delight in them, saying, ooh.
Full circle moment.
Yes, and thank you very much. Just before I conclude fully, how do people, I mean, I suspect it's easy for people to look up
Yeah,
the Black Cop,
Black
but
Cop.
more personally, how do people get hold of you?
They can get hold of me via my LinkedIn page, which is Gamal Turawa on
Which
LinkedIn.
is spelled
Gamal. Turawa is Turawa
Okay.
on LinkedIn. And on there, you can send direct message me.
LinkedIn. It's conversations that bring insight, that bring awareness. It's conversations that make us go, ooh, when we realize those new things. Thank you ever so much for being my guest today. I look forward to continuing to journey with you in Costco as other places and having many, many more ooish moments.
Things that make us go, oh.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you for joining me for today's conversation. I hope you found it insightful. Get in touch and let me know what you think, or if I or any of my guests can be of support to you. Until next time, this is Susan Popoola, working towards the creation of a Mosaic World. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast. Do visit our website at www.mosaicworld.live to find out more about what we do and how we can be of support to you. Alternatively, connect with me, Susan Popoola, spelt Popoola, on LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the podcast. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, give it a first-class rating, and tell everyone you know all about it. Thank you.